So welcome everybody. My name is Hobbs Magaray. You've probably all been following me on social media for a while. I started on social media in 2020 in the depths of the pandemic when people were locked in their houses, but a few of us lucky agrarians were running around moving cows. And it's just been an interesting adventure. And in the last year or so, I haven't been nearly as active. I've been doing a lot less actual ranching and a lot more consulting and speaking. And this lecture is one of the basis is probably the basis of how I think about what I'm doing. You know, data-driven science has done a really good job, or is currently doing a really good job of um, validating what regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture, eco-agriculture is doing. But we haven't really done a very good job of exploring the value structure that underlies why we do it and why it makes sense to us. And we don't really have an understanding of where we are in the world because we don't really know where we came from. It's almost as if we have this idea that, oh, we figured out this cute trick that helps us make food or helps us make the land healthier. But the truth is, this cute trick that we've discovered is the operating system of the planet, and it actually built the human brain. And as a result, everything that we know around us has derived. So that's why I decided to call this lecture How Grazing Animals Built the Modern World. And so we're going to go all the way back to prehistoric Pleistocene savanna, and we are going to build all the way up to where we are today and where we came from, where we are, and maybe a little bit about where we're going. So right now, I just want you to imagine that you are a primitive human with primitive language and primitive tools, and you are on the African savanna. The rains have come and the grass is tall. And danger lurks everywhere in the tall grass. This is your everyday. You have to be constantly on the lookout because there is something that is trying to eat you hiding in that tall grass. And then the men have to leave the villages in search of prey and constantly on the lookout for predators. And the women are constantly on the lookout for predators, keeping their babies close because the snakes are trying to get them from above and below, and the predators are trying to come out of the grass to get our babies. And this has been the human experience for millions and millions of years. But there's this great miracle that happens every year. The herds come through. You have the wildebeest, you have the zebra, you have antelopes, you have huge numbers of animals that we may have not even discovered yet. Moving through, taking that forage down, taking it down, 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 all the way to the ground. The elephants, which are the last to arrive, are then the last to leave. And as you can see, done a nice job of taking all of that forage down. So now the humans can relax. For the first time, that nervous system can downregulate, and we can allow ourselves to enjoy because we can look out and see long distances. There's nothing for a predator to hide behind, so the humans can play. our primitive brain has to be in a position where it can relax for us to enjoy things. What we're looking at here is a freshly grazed savanna where we can commune. And this all goes back to Pleistocene ecology. Now, the Pleistocene was 2.6 million years ago to 12,800 years ago. Also known as the Ice Age, there were about 4 glacial maximum, glacial minimum cycles that went through the Pleistocene. And in common culture, everybody thinks of the Ice Age as this really hellish time. And if you were in Wisconsin during a glacial maximum, absolutely, you were under, a mile of ice maybe. But closer to the equator and during those glacial minimum periods, it was actually quite nice. So to start, one of the things that I want to lay the foundation with is the idea of what grazing animals exist to do. And this is one of the things that we just don't really have a good answer for until we start thinking about it. And it's very simple. They exist to cycle forage. That is why the pressures of ecological evolution allowed them to emerge. They exist to digest and process forage. That's the purpose of digestion, to process forage. Because we have three options. You can digest it, which is fermentation in the digestive tract. The forage can slowly oxidize, which means turns yellow and most of the carbon escapes into the atmosphere, or it can quickly oxidize, that's fire. And many of you will already know a lot of the things that I'm going to go over today, but I think there's going to be a lot of good new stuff too. Here we have the 2 main digestive technologies. On the top, we have hindgut fermenters. This is going to be your horses, your zebras, your mammoths, your mastodons, your elephant. They have a giant colon, and that allows them to stay in good body condition on a much poorer forage, a much lower protein forage. And you have, on the bottom, the ruminant. That's your cattle, your sheep, your goats, your antelope. This is hindgut fermentation. This is foregut fermentation. And the 2 of them work in tandem in a properly functioning ecosystem to take the grass all the way down. In a properly functioning ecosystem, the ruminants get the choice stuff. That's why they generally show up first. And then you have a mixed period where you have hindgut fermenters and foregut fermenters, ruminants. And then at the end of that migratory period, as the herds go through, you generally have hindgut fermenters left because all the good stuff has been taken. And the hindgut fermenters can take all of that stuff down. This is why you can't give your horses really hot forage or they'll get in trouble, because they're designed to work with the ruminants to take all of the forage. Now here is the most celebrated animal of many of the regenerative of many regenerative enthusiasts. This is the bison, but we notice something is very, very much missing from this picture. And that is the hindgut fermenter. Bison are ruminants. They're not designed to take the ranker, less palatable parts of the grass. So even when we say we need to return to a pre-European way of thinking with regard to how the ecology works, this is still not good enough. You have to go all the way back to the Pleistocene before we're in a position where things are actually operating properly. Now, here is a collection of Pleistocene animals, Pleistocene predators and Pleistocene herbivores. Now, we all have an understanding, a scale of how big an elephant is. So here we have elephants, we have mastodons, we have mammoths, giant sloth here. It was up to 10 feet tall. This is an armadillo the size of a golf cart. So you can imagine that the absolute force, the power that these herds of animals, which were moved around by the American lion, the dire wolf, all kinds of terrifying predators, the short-faced bear, that was the largest bear that ever existed, the short-faced bear. You can imagine that the force of those herds on the land was far greater than the 1,000-pound animals that we have moving around today. And the numbers that they had were far more than the numbers that we have today. We have something like 500,000 bison on the planet and 1.5 billion cattle on the planet. During the height of the Pleistocene, the numbers were far larger of all of these animals across the board. And also, it's worth noting that during the Pleistocene, the atmospheric CO2 level never cracked 200 parts per million. There was a paper that came out in 2019 from the University of Nanjing that examined carbonaceous deposits and found that it never cracked 200 parts per million. We're at 435 right now. So a lot more carbon in the atmosphere than we had through the Pleistocene. A lot of factors influencing that, but it is still interesting to note. And even as close as the 1950s, some of you may have seen this picture before. But this is what a herd of elephants looked like in Kenya in the 1950s. And it's interesting to look at how many there were and how tightly they're bunched as they're migrating. But also, if you look really closely, there's not a ton of forage left behind here. You know, they're not going by and saying, you know, we better leave half. You know, so there is a huge element of non-selective grazing that is demonstrated in the natural world in a properly set up migratory context. And here's elephants doing what elephants do. Now, the one thing that's really interesting to note about the Pleistocene is that there wasn't so much diversity in terms of ecological zones. It wasn't a ton of humid continental. It wasn't humid subtropical, desert. It wasn't this huge variety of Mediterranean ecological zones. The most dominant and prevalent zone, ecological zone, during the Pleistocene for that entire spread was savanna. And, you know, Heather mentioned earlier that she's in the post-oak savanna. During the Pleistocene, that little strip of savanna that we have in the United States that goes basically from Wisconsin down through Texas was way wider, way wider. It extended the grasslands that we have basically extending from Kansas all the way to the Rocky Mountains. That was savanna. And the closed-in forests that we have extending from basically Kansas and that, or the 100th meridian back east, that was savanna. Much, much more productive ecological type for nutrient cycling, for water cycling, for carbon cycling. It's a much more effective regulating mechanism for the engine of life that is the biosphere. It's just a really, really good producer. There's so much life per cubic meter that you get in a really nice, healthy, biodiverse savanna that it's just really tough to come up with something better than that. Now you have much more reduced fire activity. There is a large body of literature out there showing, I have a bunch on my computer, showing that wildfires are negatively correlated with they're positively correlated with the amount of savanna that there is in existence. During the Pleistocene, the frequency and the scale of wildfires was far less than it is today. And it makes perfect sense, right? You have these massive herds of animals moving through, you have them removing the fine fuel, you have them knocking down the brush, so those ladder fuels that are taking the fire up into the canopy are fewer. And the canopy isn't closed in because it's a savanna, it's a wooded parkland. So you can't have fires jumping from tree to tree. Also, in most cases, I'll get back to this in a second. In most cases, you have the most lightning during the wet season. So you have ground that holds more water, you have green grass, you're much less likely to have an explosive fire jump off. And you can just imagine that if trees work as water pumps into the atmosphere, which we all know that they do, there's some evidence to indicate that if we didn't have trees, that we wouldn't have rain more than 100 miles inland because they're pumping the water out of the ground into the atmosphere and just moving it away from the ocean. You can imagine that if you had a nice even spread of water pumps, you would have a much more regulated climate. And as I mentioned earlier, the lightning is primarily during the rainy season, so less likely that you're going to have a big fire jump off during the dry season because of a random bolt of lightning. Plus, at that point, these massive herds of animals would have generally moved through and taken most of that forage anyway. So, there was much less of a need for controlled burns. The reason that humanity has gotten so excited about controlled burns is because of the massive lack that we have of the animals that can process this forage in their digestive systems. It's a far superior way to process this forage. If you can do it biologically as opposed to chemically and burn it, it's much better for the downstream forms of life. If you burn it, the CO2 has to go into the atmosphere, and then it has to re-enter through a plant anyway where it just came from to get back into the cycle of life, generally speaking. Now, this is a graphic that I pulled from a French paper showing the increase in cranial capacity of humanity over the last 10 million years. Now, you'll remember that I said the Pleistocene was 2.6 million years ago, about right here, to 12,800 years ago, about right here. And the thing that you'll notice is there is a massive increase in cranial capacity. So during this Pleistocene savanna-dominated period, the human brain tripled in size. So things must have been going really well for us. And then this is the Holocene, 12,800 years ago. Interestingly enough, the Holocene is sometimes referred to as the Pyrocene. Just a side note on that, there is, particularly in Australia, there is a huge amount of evidence to indicate that when they started doing what over there they call fire stick burning, the entire ecology of the continent shifted from a fire sensitive ecology to a fire dependent or fire resilient economy. And that happened about 45 to 50,000 years ago. So it would have been very interesting to see what the Australian continent would have been about 40 to 50,000 years ago. And interestingly enough, across the entire world except Australia, the massive die-out concentrated right around that boundary between the Pleistocene and the Holocene 12,800 years ago. But Australia, most of it happened 40 to 50,000 years ago. And I think a lot of that is going to be attributed to the widespread use of fire. So This is a picture of what's called the sheep meadow in Central Park. Some of you have maybe been to this place. It's one of a lot of movies, they use the sheep meadow, but this is where humans like to go to enter into a state of relaxation. This is where we like to be. Nowhere for predators to hide. And I know it seems like almost a silly thing, but the hypothalamus, which sits right on top of the spine, is very, very old. And half of that deals with half of the hypothalamus deals with our sort of unconscious, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, I got to breathe. The other is like forward advancement is one of the ways of kind of thinking about it. And your ability to pursue goals and aims on a very fundamental primal level is mediated by your ability to not get eaten. So it may seem a little bit wild in this modern day and age that we have to say people are out there having a good time because they're not afraid of being eaten, but that's exactly what's happening. These people are out there lounging because they are not afraid that they're going to be eaten. There is a prevailing theory with the saber-toothed tiger that it was a specialist for young primates, that the shape of its mouth and its digestive system was specifically designed to predate on small primates. So human beings, and I cannot stress this enough, human beings have lived almost the entirety of our evolutionary experience in absolute abject terror. And so the fact that we can go relax on a savanna is because it has been freshly grazed. That's what we're looking at here. This is a freshly grazed savanna with scattered trees that allows us the opportunity to then start this strange process where we can evolve these complex game-like mechanisms. Here is Central Park from above. I'm going to give you a few of these examples. This is King's Domain in Melbourne, Australia. Same thing. Everywhere you go, you're going to see that savanna. We go to great expense to create savanna everywhere we want to go. Country clubs, people don't like playing golf because they like to hit a ball and then chase it. That's kind of a part of it. Yeah, it's kind of fun to compete and stuff, but the main reason people go golfing is to hang out with their friends on the savanna where they can see that predators are not going to eat them. That is central to the human experience, is being pretty sure you're not going to get eaten and allowing that to and once you can satisfy that basic condition, then our higher, more esoteric, abstract machinations, neurological machinations can then turn on and start to function. We can't create a unifying theme of physics, a unifying understanding of physics if we're always afraid we're going to be eaten. Every rich person's manor is a artistic recreation of a savanna. And then right in the middle of the most abstract, financial, high economic activity in the world, we create our most sacred space, which is the savanna. It's the most important thing to us, is the savanna. And people don't know it. We're like fish in water with regard to the savanna. Here it is in Madrid. There's a savanna right here. And then the Royal Palace of Madrid, they have Royal Palace of Madrid. The Spanish royalty has their own private savanna. This is all over the world. You'll see this all over the world, over and over. If you walk outside and you're in a neighborhood right now, imagine that the houses are not there and that it's great, freshly grazed grass. savanna. This is Sydney. I was there in November of last year and saw some very, very interesting things. I mean, this is a picture I took, and we're all familiar with this shape right here. This is I believe it's called Hyde Park in Sydney. I know there's a Hyde Park in London as well, but this is, I believe, Hyde Park in Sydney. Beautiful biodiversity in a savanna. I actually want to go back up real quick. This is the botanical garden in Sydney. This is actually right around where they first, right here was what they called Botany Bay when the first Europeans arrived. And so that's why Sydney is right here. But now they've created a botanical garden with a perfect savanna. So what is that? It's a biodiverse savanna. We go to great expense to create biodiverse savannas everywhere that we can. So back down to here, this is this park right here. And you'll notice this particular shape, and there are a couple of areas we see this shape in our more abstract spiritual undertakings. Tree-lined lane, perfect savanna, identical layout to the inside of a cathedral. Yes, like there are some load-bearing mechanical elements that trees and pillars have in common, but to design a cathedral to explicitly give you the sense that you are in a savanna, perfectly spaced savanna, symmetrical savanna, the shape of doing everything we can to approach truth and beauty and symmetry through this natural emergence. It's just remarkable. And that's why we have stained glass windows to approximate the sun coming through the leaves of the savanna at night. If you go inside one of the great cathedrals, and this is actually one of my biggest beefs with modern churches, is they don't approximate the savanna enough. It doesn't elicit that deep spiritual feeling because it's not connecting with that root of your brain, those deep-seated neurological processes and structures that make us feel at home in the savanna. The savanna is implicitly, inherently interconnected with our sense of the divine. Now, this is a picture that my friend and client sent me when he was with his family in England about a couple months ago. This is King's College at Oxford. Like, look at this. This is clearly a savanna. This is just the shapes are it's the same. It's clearly a savanna. And for extra credit, he asked his daughters, "Hey, can you guys go around and see if you can find some herd animals in this in some of the stained glass windows?" And about 5 minutes later, his daughters came back and said, "Here they are." So there's some herd animals there. If I can remember correctly, herd animals right there. So the herd animals and the savanna are intrinsically interlinked. And I find this actual picture very, very interesting because you have the angels, and then you have the savanna, and then you have humans. So the savanna, in a sense, is our conduit to the divine. So something really crazy happened here. Something 2.6 million years ago happened to our brain. And it makes you wonder, what is it? Let's imagine that suddenly we have I also do want to add about this time, there is some emerging evidence to indicate that this was about the time that the more browsing type animals started to transition from being more stagnant and staying in one area to start migratory activity. So that great migratory activity appears to have grown in as a part of the overall ecological process right about the same time that the human brain started taking off, which is a fascinating occurrence. So you can imagine that we're in this position where suddenly we start having these beautiful savannas that begin to arrive, that to emerge from the ecology. We come down out of the trees and we start developing culture, because now the grass is cleared. We can start spending a little bit of time where we're not in terror of being eaten 24 hours of the day. You know, there are, I can't remember exactly which primate it is, but it has two different predator calls. One predator call from above, one predator call from below. So when an older one of these primates calls for the predator from above, they know to look out for a snake, and predator below, they know to look out for some sort of wild cat. And when one of the younger primates makes that call, it always has to be verified by one of the older primates to make sure there's not a mistake made. So fascinating look into the depths of how our primitive brain is wired to constantly be looking out for these predators, and how the cessation of that neuroticism is what has allowed us to start inventing culture, to start inventing this game where we can have music, where we can have these interesting relations. I was giving this this lecture at Texas A&M about a month ago to their graduate students in the range management class, and I said, look out the window. Texas A&M has gone to great lengths to create a savanna for you so that you can be in the ideal conditions for your development, for your for hunting for mates, for everything that you would want to advance yourself as a human being. You will find in this place of higher education that is designed to be a savanna. And this is the Sofia Reina Museum in Madrid. I was there in January with my family, and I was giving this lecture to De Yerba, which is the Spanish grass-fed organization. And there was something that was kind of missing, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was with this whole thing. I hadn't quite been able to build the ladder all the way to the top or all the way to the bottom, depending on how you want to look at it. And so we went into this museum, and behind me, where I was sitting taking this picture, was a Picasso exhibit. There was a lot of Picasso in there. There was a lot of Dali, all these incredible pieces of art, incredible pieces of art. And I'm sitting there thinking about all of the celebration of art that humanity has acquired and put in this museum, but that's not the central art piece of this whole museum. I realized sitting there that the central art piece of this museum is a savanna. You walk into this museum, it goes all the way around the outside, and in the middle is a savanna. You've got your water points in the savanna, and in the middle of this savanna is a piece of art. Now, art done well connects us with the divine. And so the savanna is where we were able to begin to approach the divine, is where we became somehow more than simply animals. Right here, it's telling us the divine, we found the divine in the savanna. You walk in, you're surrounded by great art. In the middle is the savanna. In the middle of the savanna is a piece of art. It could not be more clear. It hit me in that moment that that's what's going on here. The savanna made us humans, and when we became humans, we began our search for the divine. And in many cases, I think a lot of great human beings have made some real progress and found a beautiful connection with the divine, and that would never have been possible without the savanna. Just imagine if snakes ran the world and they evolved to the level that we are right now. Do you think that they would be creating savannas? Like, absolutely not, because when the grass is grazed, you can see the snakes. That's not their perfect habitat. Our perfect habitat is the savanna. Now, this is a painting by a 16th century Danish painter. I think Abelgard, I think is his name. And when I first saw this painting, it just absolutely knocked my socks off. And that's, once again, that's the beautiful thing about art, is that before you can articulate what's going on, it can just slap you in the most beautiful way. And so I saw this painting and I was like, this is something miraculous about this. Now, this is a painting of Audumla. This is Audumla. Audumla is the pre-cosmogonic or primordial cow. Now, this is a scene from the Prose Edda, which is basically Nordic mythology. Now, Nordic mythology is, obviously Northern European mythology, and this particular scene comes right from how the world was created. Okay, so just to begin, how the world was created in Nordic mythology has a cow right in the middle of it, has a grazing animal right in the middle of it. And that's just noteworthy to begin with. So in the Nordic equivalent of Genesis basically says, in the beginning there was frost and fire. Like, those were the two things. And they met and they created what were called the elemental drops. And the first elemental drop created this guy. Now, his name is Ymir. Now, Ymir is the father of the Jotnar. The Jotnar are kind of like gods, but they're at war with the gods. And this guy, we'll get to him in a minute, his name is Buri. He was the father of the gods, like Thor and the ones we all know. And then those gods went on to create humanity. So you have, in this picture, the primordial cow. You have the father of the Jotnar, which are the ones that battle the gods. You have that duality. You have that movement back and forth that pushes all things forward. And so then the second elemental drop, first elemental drop was Ymir. You have the second elemental drop becomes Audumla, because Ymir needs something to eat. So Audumla is born, and in the text it says there's a river of milk that flows from each of her teats. So she is the source of all nourishment, basically. Now, she herself needs to have some sustenance as well. So she begins licking on the rime, which is the frost on the rocks, to get the salt and to get the moisture. And so she does this, and over the course of 3 days, she uncovers this guy, Buri. The first day she uncovered his head. First day she uncovered his hair. Second day she uncovered his head. Third day she uncovered his body. So think about what they're saying for a second. The Nordic mythological tradition, talking about the creation of the world, says that a herd animal actually brought humanity into being out of the rocks, out of the dust. This is clearly an analogy, very similar to what they say in Genesis, where man is made out of clay. So and think back to what we were talking about. Let me just jump up here real quick to Actually, that's fine. Let's just look at right here. Suddenly, right here, when the herd animals in the savanna comes on the scene really hard, then suddenly, boom, humanity emerges out of that activity. The activity of the herd animal, according to Nordic mythology, is what brought the father of humanity out of the earth. And that's just another telling of what this is right here. Same story. Here is another, and this is endlessly deep. You know, we could get into the we could get into the mythological, the psychological activities in this, and I do go into it a lot more in depth in my book that's coming out in the next couple of months. But for right now, we're gonna keep it right there, just for the sake of keeping this reasonably short. I mean, it's right there. The herd animal brought humanity out. It helped humanity emerge from the pre-cosmogonic void. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful. It's another more ancient picture of Alumla. See the four rivers coming from her teats. This is, I found this picture this morning, actually, and this is also amazing. This is Nerthus, a Germanic, also Northern European, obviously, a Germanic goddess who is associated with Mother Earth herself, and she is being pulled by cows. Mother Earth is, and the goddess associated with Mother Earth by these Northern German tribes being pulled by cattle. Not being pulled by horses, being pulled by cattle. It's just it's amazing, and it makes sense deep in your mind, right? It wouldn't make sense if it was a squirrel, right? It wouldn't be the same. It just works when we see a herd animal in this capacity, in this capacity. Yeah, there's her name right there, Nerthus. Nerthus, probably. This is one of Picasso's really famous pieces. This is actually really interesting too. Before I get to this, I want to kind of go back here actually and say one more thing about this is she's not only allowing humanity to emerge, she's allowing order itself to emerge. Her activity is bringing order out of the pre-cosmogonic void. The pre-cosmogonic void is associated with the feminine and the place from which all, it's the place of potential from which all can emerge. And it takes the and the masculine working on the feminine creates order. And that's another thing that we're seeing here. As I said, it's infinitely deep and I can go into it more, but that's associated with this. This is a bull's head. This is that's the name of this piece of art. The bull's head, I believe it's hanging in the Louvre. It was made by Picasso when he was kicked out of Spain during World War II. You may remember that Spain was ruled by an autocrat named Franco, General Franco, and Picasso was a wild leftist modern artist, which had no place in his totalitarian regime. So he was kicked out and he was living in France during the Nazi occupation of Paris. And you can imagine during 1944, 1943, 1944, there weren't a lot of art supplies going around. So what Picasso did was he went to a rubbish dump and he found some pieces of a bicycle, an old bicycle that had been discarded, and he created a bull's head with it. Now, from a purely logical standpoint, it's like, so what? But remember, we're thinking about things archetypally here. And so in a time of great disorder, great chaos, Picasso, who in this case represents the force of the masculine, goes into a rubbish dump, a representation of the pre-cosmogonic potential, and he pulls out some items and fashions them together into a bull's head. Now, as I said, he didn't make a squirrel. He didn't make anything. He didn't make a cat. He made a bull's head. And that works for us. And my hypothesis is that the reason that works for us is because it is the herd animals that brought humanity ourselves into a position where we are the preeminent beings on the planet. We own 50% of the planet's surface, and we influence 90% of the planet's surface. And it was the herd animals that created the conditions that allowed us to take off on that rise. And that's why it's significant that Picasso goes into a garbage dump, pulls out a couple of items, and makes a bull's head. Like it's an amazing, amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. Okay, great. So the Pleistocene was wonderful. The human brain got huge. It was Eden. All you had to do is walk around and pick from the trees. That's another thing that I failed to mention to you guys. During the Pleistocene, that 2.6 million years to 12,800 years ago, our brain size tripled, and we never invented a new type of technology. We got quite a bit better with our stone work, but we didn't get into any sort of metallurgy or any sort of technology of that sort until about 12,800 years ago, until we started to invent agriculture. And another corollary of this entire conversation is that agriculture was not some beautiful, wonderful, great thing that we invented that made everything better. It's my offering that we had to invent agriculture so we wouldn't die, because the ecology changed so dramatically that we couldn't just walk around and exist on the spoils and the surplus that this extremely healthy savanna ecology was creating for us. So then the question becomes, what happened? Now, there are several ideas. The most well-accepted one, which I reject outright in my mind, is the overkill, that human beings suddenly just killed all these animals into oblivion. It doesn't make sense on a lot of levels. And I would be happy to have a longer conversation with people about that. But for right now, I'm going to go into what I actually think happened. And there's an emerging body of evidence that is lending itself to this idea. Also, additional geomagnetic changes maybe had something to do with it. But here is the theory that I'm going to put forward is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. So right around 12,800 years ago, this is the boundary between the Pleistocene and the Holocene or the Pyrocene. Overnight, suddenly temperatures drop 10 to 20 degrees Celsius overnight. And this is what they call the Younger Dryas. And for 1,400 years, they remained that low. And so suddenly you're in Miami, and then overnight it's Portland, Maine. It's Boston. Just suddenly the temperatures just plunge. Now you can imagine the havoc that would wreak on the ecology. During this period, we had massive, massive extinctions. 82% of these animals weighing over 44 kilos, that's basically a mega herbivore. A mega herbivore actually is over 1,000 kilos, but 44 kilos is an important cutoff for the size of animals. This cutoff is also why when the dinosaurs went extinct, it was the small rodents that evolved into us eventually, because they were smaller and had the advantage of living in more difficult conditions. So 82% of these animals disappeared in North America, 74% South America, 71% in Australasia. You can see the rest, 59% in Europe, 52% in Asia. But curiously, only 16% died off in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, where today do we have the largest biodiversity of mega herbivores? Africa. So something happened that caused a huge die-off everywhere except Africa. Human populations decreased by up to 60%. probably more than that, but that's a conservative estimate. And there is a plethora of evidence showing that what we had at the Younger Dryas boundary 12,800 years ago was the largest biomass burning episode in at least 120,000 years. In that event, the same event that dropped temperatures 10 degrees Celsius overnight, about a third of the planet's surface burned. Pretty wild to think. So what could have happened to make all of this unfold? And then here's Younger Dryas right here. Sudden drop, sudden rise. We don't actually know what caused the rise, but it is I am more and more all the time in the camp that it's the Younger Dryas impact. So just to show you that in recent human history, there's plenty of evidence showing that we can go through really wild astronomical times. This is 1833, the night the stars fell. I'm struggling to remember exactly the name of the meteor stream we went through during this particular event, but this is a picture in Florida, a wood carving in Florida, and this is a picture in Niagara Falls depicting the exact same night in 1833. There were so many meteorites that it lit up the sky for hours, And luckily, most of them were so small that they didn't cause any damage. But clearly, we went through a very, very thick, actually, this is the Leonid meteor stream, as opposed to the Taurid meteor stream, which caused the Younger Dryas impact. This is, many of you may have heard the Tunguska event. This is a meteorite that blew up about 4 to 5 kilometers above the surface of Siberia, and it laid down trees for something like 10 kilometers in every direction. This was the equivalent of a nuclear weapon, essentially, without the radioactivity. There are reports that people saw this light from hundreds of kilometers away. It moved the foundation of houses 30 kilometers away, and this was just one meteorite in 1908. And then you can see today the directly underneath where the airburst was. There's just no trees. Now, this is the Taurid meteor stream, and twice a year, the Earth goes through the stream. And the idea is that it's once in basically June and once in October, November. And on one pass, we're coming into it where we can see it, and one path, we can't see it. I believe it's the June, July path that we cannot see it as we come into it. And the idea is that this comet named Encke came into the solar system and then broke up, went through a period of what's called disaggregation. And shortly after it broke up and got caught in our solar system in the orbit of our sun, it was still in quite large pieces. And it was at this time, about 12,800 years ago, that the Earth encountered this disaggregated comet. And the idea was that it struck in many pieces of this disintegrated, large pieces of the disintegrated comet struck in this general area, and the debris field spread all over this area we can see right here. Now, they've found carbon microspherules, nanodiamonds, iridium, extraterrestrial platinum, which has an orientation of neutrons and protons that are only found in extraterrestrial from extraterrestrial sources. So, and this is some fairly old information. There's new information coming out all the time, backing up that something cataclysmic happened right about that time. And there's also a large degree of evidence, a large amount of evidence showing that the Gulf Stream stopped during that period. The Gulf Stream stopped because of a large influx of water, large influx of very cold water. Boom, shut down the Gulf Stream. Now, a huge amount of biomass burning, Gulf Stream stops. You have a huge cloud that's of particulate matter that's been ejected into the atmosphere that's blocking out the sun. All of those things together dump the temperature overnight, and that's really bad for all of the massive animals that require a large amount of forage that has to be produced through photosynthesis to live. And that is basically a short summary of what actually I believe and many preeminent scientists believe happened at the Younger Dryas boundary. Now, this is a dig site in Arizona, and what I'm pointing out here is what's called the black mat. The black mat, here's a better picture of it, is associated with the Younger Dryas boundary. This is from that burning event. Now, you'll notice that it's a completely different soil type and geological material above it than below it. And below it, you will find megafauna fossils, large grazing animals. Above it up here, no megafauna fossils. Below it, you will find Clovis culture fossils. Above it, above this black mat, you will find no Clovis culture fossils. So whatever happened wiped out all the people and all the mega herbivores. Now, there's a very interesting example of a mammoth, a young mammoth who was later named Eloise in Arizona, and she was found with her hind legs removed. So she was in the process of being butchered with that black mat covering her. So she was in the process of being butchered when this biomass burning event occurred. So you can imagine, and also I should add that a couple of 100 yards away, they found I believe it was 2 Clovis culture people and those 2 hind legs also covered in the black mat. So you can imagine what these people experienced. They just killed a mammoth. Everything was going great. They'd removed the hind legs. They had taken them over to their campsite. They're about to butcher this to process this leg and have a great dinner. And then suddenly, I'm assuming that this is going to have been during the side of the torrid meteor stream they couldn't see coming. Suddenly, these massive pieces of comet of disaggregating comet enter the atmosphere, or if they couldn't see the angle, these massive pieces of ice and earth that had been smashed and ejected into the atmosphere start coming down. Because if they're burning in Arizona, something is making that burn. So fire is falling on these people from the sky. And that over Canada, over the United States, over northern Mexico, over much of Europe, this is what they experienced. The whole world was on fire in that moment, and the Eloise mammoth example was a fascinating little snapshot into exactly what was happening right there. So this was the end of Eden. This was the end. This was human beings are no longer in a beautiful, wonderful position where your brains are just going to continue to evolve and you're going to be able to frolic in this golden age between having a primitive brain worrying about not being eaten and having a large brain trying to survive in a fallen ecology. That's where we are right now. We have a big brain and we're trying to learn to survive in a fallen ecology. and there was a golden age in the middle of it. That's for sure. These are just a couple of examples. I have a lot more in my book of documentation showing that there were areas that were savannas, and then the Younger Dryas impact happened, and then closed in forest. That's what happened in the Willamette Valley. These are some captions from the a master's thesis that was done by a guy named Gilmore at Portland State, showing basically that megafauna went away. Younger Dryas boundary happened. The megafauna went extinct, and the forests went from savanna to closed in forest. Same exact thing happened in Thailand, and I can show you examples happening in Europe, happening in Texas, happening in many other places in North America, happening in Africa, just China, tons and tons of places. As I said in the beginning of this, the primary ecological type during the Pleistocene was savanna, and it was maintained by these animals, these massive herds of migrating animals. They created the conditions for our rise. We constantly create those conditions around us now. But the Younger Dryas impact event happened. They all went extinct. Most of them went extinct. Huge numbers of them all went extinct. And suddenly we're left in this fallen ecology. Even when Lewis and Clark went across to explore the Louisiana Purchase and to try to find a northern route to the Pacific, and all of the wonderful, amazing ecology they witnessed, still that was a fallen ecology compared to what was present during the Pleistocene. Now, the takeaway from all of this is that a properly functioning global ecology relies on Pleistocene megafauna. We are running an operating system that is missing key components. The plants still remember. Everything is still set up to operate with the maintenance of Pleistocene megafauna. We don't have them anymore. That's why our fires are so big. That's why our climate is so dysregulated. We don't have these massive animals in these automatic, instinctive, migratory activities that has regulated and kept the earth in a situation where it is far more reasonably stable. And this is why we, in the regenerative movement, have taken it upon ourselves to try to put what we can of that operating system back into place. Now, do we have mammoth and mastodon to do that? I mean, not yet. Maybe we'll be able to raise them from the dead with an increase in technology. That would be really cool. I think grazing mammoths with drones would be super amazing. I think that it's totally within reach in the next century with drone technology, and I think with genetic technology. And I think that the more that we get to know about Earth's operating system, the more we're going to realize that we need them running around eating baby trees to keep these forests from getting so overgrown and creating these megafires, etc. So I think the next century is actually going to be an extremely interesting time. But for right now, we have electric fences and cattle. And so that's what we're really putting the pedal to the metal on. And that's what I've been doing for the last almost decade of my life, and now consulting other people to do the same thing. So this part has been basically where we came from and where we are. So now I'm going to get in a little bit into many of these pictures that we're moving forward to, you will have seen, especially if some of you are in the WhatsApp group, the Holistic Ranching WhatsApp group. But this is kind of what we're doing now to mimic the Pleistocene ecological activity. And ultra high density grazing is the nomenclature that I prefer to use when referring to this. You can call it management intensive grazing, you can call it adaptive multi-paddock grazing, you call it whatever, but ultra high density grazing is what I like to call it. And so these are some pictures of some colleagues of mine, and I believe Dwayne probably knows them as well, in South America, using ultra high density grazing, capturing that animal density. We're just mimicking that activity. Everybody here knows this. This is nothing new. You can see the work that's been done here, the huge amount of defoliation, high harvest efficiency grazing, really beautiful job that these guys are doing. Now I'm gonna just kind of race through this a little bit because I told you this is not going to be here's how much forage you should take. But you know, why does it work? Why does it work? Because we got to get these animals at really high densities so we can stir the soil up. We can break that soil cap so we can get better seed to soil contact, so we can get gas interchange, so we can get water interchange. It's just part of the operating system. These hooved animals need to be working that soil, and they can't do it at low densities. They just can't do it. The other benefit of having these animals at really high densities is that we get really uniform pressure. We have really uniform pressure on the forages. You know, we can't allow them to be going around taking the best stuff and losing the rest. This is why our warm season perennial population across the planet is basically non-existent anymore, because we've been grazing on these big, low pressure, big pasture scenarios for the last, essentially 2,000 to 3,000 years. And especially over the last 100 years, that's now that we have fossil energy that's allowed us to use our inefficient ecological practices in a turbocharged manner, we have basically no warm season perennials. I've seen this in Spain. I've seen this in Australia. I've seen this all across the United States. I've seen examples of it in Africa, and I've seen examples of it in South America as well. And it's the same everywhere. If you allow animals to big pasture graze, you will toast your biodiversity. It happens everywhere. And here's just a picture of moving from one paddock to another after that high harvest efficiency grazing. Remember, we're trying to mimic Pleistocene ecology. Same exact activity happening right there. Nothing here is surprising to anybody. And the one area where I will get on my soapbox a little bit here is talking about non-selective grazing. There are multiple methods for and multiple justifications for how much forage, how much residue you should leave. I am firmly in the camp that non-selective grazing, harvesting as much of the plant as you can, and then allowing a proper rest period is by far the best way to do it in my own experience. And also that's the way nature does it when you have a properly oriented set of hindgut fermenters and ruminants together. So that just, to me, that's the operating system. It seems obvious. And that's, that's backed up by the idea that root exudates create organic matter, not decomposing litter. So the idea that you want to trample everything and allow it to decompose, that's not an efficient way to make your soil better. We got to clear things out so we can establish new seedlings. When you have high harvest efficiency and you are and you have the animals at high density and you allow proper rest period, you end up with more plants per square yard. That's just the way it works. This is a farm in one of the most beautiful places on the planet that I've ever been, the Upper Murray River in Victoria, in Australia. And this is a farmer who was just starting to experiment with some more high density grazing. And what he ended up having here is a ton of wasted trampled forage that is choking the ground. And you can see also that they were going through and grazing very, very loosely, taking the best stuff, and that is going to be evidenced by the manure that you can see, the loose manure on their rumps. So just overall, this would have done much better to have a much higher harvest efficiency, probably more density and more frequent moves. This is just an example of how you can have what Johann Zietzmann calls too much but not enough density. And that was referring to the harvest efficiency. We want to really maximize that harvest efficiency. If you look at this, they're going to have to come back here sooner because they only used probably 30% of the forage. So that means they're going to have to come back 60% faster. That means the plants are not going to get a long rest period. That means the ones that were not touched, that just got laid over, they're going to have rested too long. The palatability will be down. The ones that did get eaten all the way to the ground, they're not going to be fully recovered. It's just going to be a mishmash, and it's not an effective, efficient way to do it. This is a group of Corriente cows and calves here at my place in East Texas. And you have Vases grass and a understory of Bermuda. Now, you can see these cattle are at a fairly high density. And this was in December, by the way. And at this point, the Vases grass is pretty rank. And most livestock extension agents will tell you, and many graziers, many ranchers will tell you how much they hate the Vases grass because the cattle won't eat it. But here's the after. You can see they did a really great job of taking all of the Bermuda and most of the tussock material on the Vases grass. Just really pleased with that outcome. And you can see where the line for the new break was. And here's an example of some Mashona cross calves that I had at about as high of a density as you can get. When you have your young calves that are born into this system, when you wean them off, if you can wean them onto that really hot, cool season forage and get them as tight as you possibly can, then they will spend the rest of their life grazing right next to each other without trying to kill each other, no problem. That's a really important part of this whole function. And heavy annual ryegrass, heavy clover, really you can see in the background so much of it, and this is the result. There's my son. They've taken all of the forage, and this is a beautiful result. All that manure is concentrated. Couldn't be happier with that result. And a lot of people would say that we've taken way too much of the forage, but on this really hot, cool season forage, if you take anything less than all of it, you're going to have really runny manure, and you're going to have a big a big decrease in weight gain because the nutritional balance of that ration is going to be off. So not only is it in the operating system to take all the forage, in my view, it's also especially in this really cool season period crucial to make sure that they don't have an imbalanced ration. Now here's the view from the top of the grazing lane, and this is kind of the results that we were getting. This yellow stuff is what they call buttercup. Most people will say their cattle won't eat it, and if you give them the choice, they certainly won't. So, but my cattle eat it no problem. And this just goes, and we're getting close to the end here, and so this is kind of the last hurrah. But none of this is possible in today's world without adapted, unimproved genetics. And I say unimproved because improved means animals that have been basically selected for their carcass traits over the last 100 years, animals that do really well in a feed yard and give you exactly the result you want as a result of forcing it in a feed yard. And the most important supplement of all time, selective grazing. So when you're doing this non-selective grazing like this, if you have unadapted genetics, you're going to struggle more than if you have adapted genetics. This is a really great Mashona bull that I used to own. I sold him to a place in northeastern Oklahoma a couple of years ago, but really fantastic example of an adapted animal. Just a ton of material shoved into there, nothing wasted. Very short, probably about a 4 frame size, very masculine. You want a bull that looks pissed off but doesn't act pissed off. It's this just probably the best bull I've ever owned right here. Very, very good. Just to add on to that, most cattle over the last 50 to 60 years have been bred for feedlots. That's why they're 12 to 1,400 pounds, and have because that's what the economics of the feed yards want. And it makes sense when grain was cheap and fuel was cheap, but we're not living in that world anymore. And you know, we've been so on the path of chasing one single trait. The most famous of these obviously is low birth weight. You want a calf with a low birth weight. It's like, okay, that's one trait. And it turns out that Mother Nature in a herd setting doesn't ever focus on low birth weight. They focus on cattle that can have or grazing animals that can have a calf no problem because their pelvises are properly constructed, and it's just an appropriately weighted calf. Because that's what has survived for thousands and thousands of generations leading up to that. So that's a nexus of 1,000 different traits and data points coming together, and the ultimate expression of that is fertility. And that's if you want to learn more about that, read Johann Zeitzman's book, Man, Cattle, and Veld. And another one of the important takeaways from that book and a lot of other great teachers is that improved individual performance can't compensate for a low stocking rate. If you're grazing at these high densities, you're going to have a doubling, at least a 1.5x of your stocking rate initially, and probably a doubling or tripling over several years. It just happens because you're using things more efficiently. Shorter and heavier is better. You can go and read Johann's book if you want to know exactly all of the intricate details of that. Faster an animal grows relative to its size, the more efficient it is. Shorter and heavier animals grow more per pound of body weight per day, makes them more efficient. If you look at the metrics from a landscape perspective, from a balance sheet perspective instead of the individual animal, you see the value of that. And if you want another perspective on that, watch the movie or read the book Moneyball, because this is Moneyball for ranching effectively. And you want to maximize that stocking rate because that's the #1 determining factor in your profitability. So now we're getting into the nuts and bolts of how we can combine modern day ranching with Pleistocene ecology, trying to bring that full circle. Now, this is a beautiful picture that Johann shared with us probably 3 or 4 months ago, showing a super expensive top dollar Bonsmara heifer that was 2.5 years old and hadn't yet had its first calf. Now, this was celebrated as one of the great heifers in South Africa, right? And then the next picture is just a herd cow in Zambia that's 3 years old and already on her second calf. Now, that's an animal that, according to the academics and the stud breeders, would say isn't worth anything. But according to Mother Nature, that is the essence of beauty in my mind. Commands a lot of money, zero fertility, cheap and underappreciated, maximum fertility. These are the type of animals that we want if we're going to improve the world and try to reinstate some of that Pleistocene ecology. And with that, I hope that you are able to take away that the Pleistocene savanna ecology is all around us, everywhere, from our religion to our architecture to our playtime, and it totally defines the world that's around us. And we're like fish in water to this. But now you're going to see it everywhere. You're going to walk outside and you're going to see it everywhere. And the Pleistocene ecology is the very thing that gave rise to the human experience. The modern world was built because of the massive brain that humanity developed in this extremely rich, fertile savanna environment that was created by these herd animals. So we need these herd animals to be managed in a way that keeps our ecologies healthy and keeps humanity's most beneficial ecological type as primary in our minds and in our focus as we continue to evolve as a species. Thank you guys for listening, and I hope you have enjoyed it. So let me stop this sharing here. Excellent. So I would love to take any questions that you guys may have. If you want, go ahead and just unmute yourself and ask, you know what, actually just go ahead and say that you have a question over in the chat and I'll call on you and you can unmute yourself. But if there are no questions, okay, Kent, go for it.
Can you hear me? I switched to the computer instead of my phone.
Yeah, I can hear you, Kent.
All right. My question is, because I'm interested in all this too, and have been following you since you first started on TikTok in 2020. And it's been fun to watch you evolve. But anyway, because I'm interested in direct-to-consumer marketing, my questions are like, how does the Pleistocene savanna affect our natural diet, what we're actually naturally driven to want to eat? And how do we communicate that to our customers in a way that resonates with them, just like we resonate with the savanna?
Oh, that's a
Does that
great
make sense?
question. Yeah, absolutely. I think that the I think it's fairly obvious that meat, and in particular cooked meat, is one of the most important elements that allowed the human brain to grow. So I mean, one of the things that you can communicate to your customers is like your brain would not exist without the meat of migratory animals. So, and that's kind of the one of the things that I'm trying to express, particularly with that picture of Aldumla, the primordial cow. It's like she is the source of sustenance. Not only does her activity create the savanna, which creates our ideal situation for a regulated nervous system, but also feasting upon her flesh is the has allowed humanity to flourish into what it is. It's absolutely necessary. This is, and here's one thing that maybe you can say: there's a difference between flesh and meat. Meat is lifeless. There's no spirit there. And flesh, when you say the word flesh and you think about it from the perspective that I've been trying to get across over the last hour and a half, it's quite clear to me that there is a deeper, more spiritual element of eating meat that is central to the human experience, that I think that people resonate with on a deep level. So obviously, I'm not a nutritionist, but I do know that I feel better when I eat properly grazed and finished animals, because that's what we're supposed to eat. The herds, imagine the herds come through, it's a giant grocery store that just walked through your territory. Not only is it a giant grocery store that just walked through your territory, they also cleared out all the forage, so everything that grows after that is fresh and sweet. And a primitive human could identify like 250 edible plants, and so all of those edible plants that you can identify are fresh and young and wonderful. So the herd coming through was a refreshing, delicious culinary experience for everyone, as far as I could tell.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Kent. What's up, Hunter? How you doing, man?
Howdy, I'm doing great. I enjoyed it, and always good to get into the mind of Hobbes. So my question is, we desire to be at ultra high density, but in order to make that happen tomorrow, we'd have to spend maybe close to $500,000 on brushwork and infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And so obviously we're not doing that tomorrow. We're working towards it. We have plans and everything that, little at a time and such. But my question is, at what point, at what density is it worth our time? I'm assuming there's there's a spectrum here, and obviously it's better to be on the ultra high density end of that spectrum, and that term ultra high density, for the industry as a whole, ultra high density is not all that dense, but your definition of it, right? So on our way there, as we're working towards it and getting a brushy place with limited water distribution to a point where we can graze at scale profitably, you know, there's, you know, I think if you cut our pastures are 600 acres to 800 acres, and then we subdivide all that we can inside of that. And we are generally on 100 acres at a time for a few days. And so, if all we did was cut an 800-acre pasture in half, that's better than grazing the whole 800 acres, I guess. But where in that spectrum do you think the benefit really starts to compound, or where does it get to be exponential?
The crossover point is about 200 to 250,000 pounds per acre, from what I've seen. That's when the magic really starts to happen. That's when you really start to see big changes. And what I would say is that 500,000, how much of that is in brush removal, and how much of that is in poly, and how much of that is in single line high tensile?
Yeah, so that would be to get it to a point where we're able to subdivide with temporary stuff. That none of that would be spent on permanent fencing, just right. Burying a lot of pipe, and I think maybe one additional well, a lot of storage of water, and then mostly brushwork, which is if it well, that's a can of worms. We'll leave it at.
Well, what I would say is, have you done a productivity map like a la Alejandro recommends?
Yeah, well, not formally, but yes, we know where the biggest benefit would be for sure.
Okay. Yeah. And do you have a plan and a financial not only a sort of a financial plan of where the payback would be from increased stocking rate or increased profitability, but also just an overall cost benefit? Because are you talking like 1.5 poly, 3-inch poly?
2-inch is
okay.
That's probably and there's some arithmetic. You can simplify it down to where it's just a math problem. I can be pretty confident in my assumptions on how much carrying capacity is going to be increased, and I know what the project's going to cost, and so I feel pretty confident in my assumptions there. And so, to an extent, it's just math. Like, we're going to spend X dollars, and how quick are we going to get that back? But my concern is, if we don't go whole hog and we do it a little at a time, because that's what we can afford, then at what point do we? Maybe there's a hill we've got to crest in there, and then we spend a bunch of money and don't quite make it to that hill, and we can't get the returns that I'm expecting because we didn't reach that critical point.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the benefit of there are a couple ways you could do it. Yeah, that's the benefit of starting with, just maybe 10% of your property, building out 10%, and develop a 10-year plan where you build out 10%. Maybe you reduce your stocking rate by 20-25% to finance some of that, and then you can grow the herd internally. Maybe one way to look at it, and then in a sense it becomes how you evaluate, how you view value, right? I mean, because the more you can the more grass you have in front of you, the more you can properly the more you can install proper infrastructure on your most productive areas, that means you can spend more time there, which is going to allow more grass growth and more recovery around, which is going to give you a longer runway out in front of you all the time. Now, most conventional metrics don't give any value to that, but to me, that's like a drought resilience index. You know, the amount of grass you have sitting out in front of you, and there's a value to that.
There's some benefit outside of the math problem.
Yeah,
that's hard to quantify. Yeah, that's a good thought. I don't know how to communicate that to the board that I answer to, but yeah, no, that's a great point. There's more than just the increase in carrying capacity. There's a resilience factor there.
Well, and one of the things that you can do is you can get with them and say, hey, I want to help. I want to try to figure out how we can evaluate this on the balance sheet. Because if you have a regenerative operation and you have a conventional operation, and they both show the same profit at the end of the year, but one of them has half of the ranch that hasn't been touched in terms of grass, like there's a risk mitigation factor that is huge that will pay dividends over time, especially in your drought years. So, so like, hey, can I sit down with the finance guys and figure out like how can we give this value on the balance sheet?
Right. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I'm immensely grateful to all of you for joining me today. It has been a lot of fun, and albeit a bit more of a challenge to lecture and just look at myself talk, but it's been great. And I hope if you guys have any questions that you don't want to address in the group and you want to email me separately, that would be wonderful. But I hope you all have a great rest of your day. I hope you got some value out of this, and I look forward to seeing many of you in person. All right. Bye.